Today I'm going to show you how to level up your Minecraft city with these 8 tips, and I'm going to be building along with them to show you how you can properly integrate them. So let's get into it. So starting off with tip number 1, don't be afraid to integrate different kinds of buildings, whether they are of different sizes or from different eras, which could maybe provide evidence of a war or natural disaster, causing builds to be replaced in a different style, which I did with this apartment block here, which is more modern than the building surrounding it. It can make your street seem a lot more unique and interesting rather than having the same build pasted over the whole street. Which brings me on to point number 2. Don't be afraid to integrate different zone types into your build. There's nothing inherently wrong with having a street full of one zoning type, but in some areas where you may want to increase or decrease densities, you can add in a different zone. For example, on this street, I decided to build some houses alongside this pretty dense street, which adds in a bit more complexity and detail to create a pretty cool look. You can do the same thing but adding density, which is called upzoning, which is something that I usually do, and is really easy with tip number 3, which is filler builds. This is actually a tip that I learned from Alpine 1, a guy that I'd really recommend checking out because he's a way better build than me. Basically, you create a few designs of a building, like I did in episode 1, and when there's a gap between existing builds, you just paste them in. It's a trick that shouldn't be too noticeable as long as you don't use them too often. For example, half of these builds are filler and I doubt you would notice if I didn't tell you. Tip number 4, use cycle lanes. This is mainly something that I do as I always get annoyed at the lack of infrastructure where I live. Don't use these on every road. That's just overkill and just unrealistic. The way to properly do it is with interconnecting sections, similar to how you would plan out a transit line. This also makes sure that people aren't over dependent on cars, which sort of brings me on to my next point, which is parking. When planning a city, it's possible to reduce the amount of cars, but realistically there'll have to be street parking in places and maybe a few parking lots here and there. For my build, I integrated some street parking on some residential roads, and created a little car park for the residents of a block. I obviously didn't go full out Texas style, as this was meant to be a European inspired city, but a few cars here and there wouldn't create too many problems. Tip number 6. Build small sports fields wherever you can. It creates a pretty nice and lively environment and also keeps people active. I built a few tennis courts, basketball courts, and a football pitch, and scattered them around the place. Tip number 7. Detail your shops. Not adding proper detail to my main streets has made certain parts of my city look dead and boring, and just unrealistic in the past. Take this street for example. If I remove the details from the shops, look at the difference. It's practically night and day. It's something that takes literally a few seconds and still makes a huge difference. All I do is just implement some hedges or flowers to show some property borders. I also add seating for restaurants and cafes, and add these things to some shops. Tip number 8. Add public transit. In most developed countries, there are 2 ways that cities are built. One revolving around cars and another revolving around pedestrians and public transit. I'm pretty sure you can tell which is better. You don't have to go overboard like I did and build an entire functional metro system, which I did in this video up here. That's just overkill. A neat way to do this is with small bus stops along an imaginary route, like I've done here. Alright, so that should be it for today. I hope you've learned something new. Anyways, thanks so much for watching and I'll see you next time.